The Eclipse. To this day, one of the most iconic yet traumatizing events to take place in anime and manga. For anyone who has read or watched Berserk, this entire sequence no doubt has carved an everlasting scar into their mind that will never dissipate. And that's because of just how brutal it is, both emotionally and, well, let's just say physically as well. Berserk is, of course, one of the greatest stories ever told, and there's countless reasons for this. The art, the characters, the grandiosity of the story itself. However, one thing that I personally really appreciate about Berserk as a piece of fiction is how it consistently makes me ask myself, what would I do in this situation? I would die. I would absolutely probably die. However, lately, I've been expanding on that question and asking myself, what would other characters from other anime series do if they had to be put through the eclipse? And today, I would like to explore that question. Who would or wouldn't survive the eclipse? Now, before we get into the different characters I want to talk about, I would like to lay down some rules and criteria that we'll need to keep in mind. So with that said, rule number 1. With the exception of one character from this list, all the characters are going to be the latest iteration from their respective animes. We're not going to be counting manga here. Next up, rule number 2. The character doesn't need to actually beat all the apostles or the God Hand. They just need to survive as long as Guts did until he was rescued by the Skull Knight. Rule number 3. The God Hand, this includes Griffith, will solely be focused on Guts and not our character. So they're not going to be actively trying to kill whoever we're talking about in this scenario. And lastly, rule number 4. I'm not going to be doing any overpowered characters because I kind of feel like that defeats the purpose. Like, yes, it's obvious that characters like Gojo, Saitama, or Goku would probably be able to survive the eclipse unscathed. They're all basically gods. It just wouldn't really be fun. And this should probably go without saying, but if you're watching an anime that features any of these characters, there's probably a good chance that we're going to be getting into some spoilers here. So if you'd like to avoid having any story details ruined for you, then feel free to use the timestamps below to skip around. Now, with all that said, let's get into our first character who I think could survive the eclipse. And that character is Monkey D. Luffy from One Piece. Okay, I can already hear what you're all saying. I thought you said you weren't going to put in overpowered characters, but Luffy with 5th gear could easily beat all the apostles. And all I have to say to that is, oh, you little fool. Quite presumptuous of you to think I'm talking about Gear 5 Luffy, because I'm not even talking about post-time skip Luffy. In fact, I'm not even talking about Gear 3 or 2 Luffy. I'm talking about base Luffy pre-Water 7. That's right. Basic white bread East Blue Luffy. The 4 criteria I'm judging all of these characters on are combat ability, endurance, pain tolerance, and mental fortitude. And East Blue Luffy honestly excels in all of these. For one, even before Luffy undergoes any kind of crazy transformations or learns any super outrageous techniques, he's already kind of a menace when it comes to his ability to fight. Considering that he was raised in the harsh wilderness, this is really no surprise. But what only enhances this is his explosive energy that allows him to keep going, as well as his Devil Fruit ability, which obviously, as you all know, allows him to stretch and cover a wide amount of area with his attacks, which would absolutely come in handy if he were battling against an army of apostles. And Luffy is no stranger to fighting enemies that are much larger than him, or even suffering from really bad combat injuries. Luffy's rubber body makes it much more difficult for blunt attacks to do a lot of damage to him, though he is susceptible to being impelled. However, for some reason, I often see people treating this like swords and sharp objects or Luffy's kryptonite or something. Like, they're not. When Luffy gets stabbed, it's just like any other character getting stabbed. It's not especially effective against him or anything. His battle with Don Krieg at the Barrage Baratie is a great example of this, where he gets impaled several times and is able to fight through it regardless. Last, of course, is Luffy's mental fortitude, and as scary as the apostles are, I really don't think they're going to make Luffy unwaver. If they're killing the Band of the Hawk, that would honestly only serve as fuel for Luffy's relentless rage. Which is why I personally think that East Blue Luffy would survive the eclipse. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same for our next contender, Edward Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. You all know that I am one of the biggest FMA glazers you can find. I mean, Brotherhood is my all-time favorite TV show, period, but as much as it kills me to say, Ed has the same odds of protecting the Band of the Hawk as he does Nina Tucker. Oh, come on! It's been like 20 years at this point. Line up! Edward has above average hand-to-hand combat skills and endurance, and of course his alchemy is an incredibly helpful ability to have. That being said, where I feel as though his odds fall apart is when it comes to his pain tolerance and mental fortitude. Ed has shown in the past that if he takes one really bad hit, he's basically down for the count. Two of the best examples of this being his fight with Envy in the False Portal of Truth and his fight with Kimberly in Bascule. Injuries that characters who barely survived the eclipse like Guts would probably shrug off no problem. Combine that with how at times Ed's mental state can be easily shaken in dire situations, as well as the fact that he had trouble fighting off an army of mannequins with both Scar and a team of chimeras, makes me believe that he probably wouldn't stand a chance against an army of apostles. Plus, I mean, if his automel arm gets destroyed, which let's be honest, we all know that it would be, he basically loses his alchemy and at that point is just a normal dude. A normal dude who is also missing an arm. So as painful as it is for me to admit, I just have to be honest and say that my GOAT, Edward Elric, is probably not making it out alive. However, a character that I do think would make it out alive, and this could potentially be a controversial opinion, is Kento Nanami from Jujutsu Kaisen. Nanami is very interesting in that on the surface, it'd be so easy to assume that he would die in a situation like this. I mean, at this point, one of his most famous scenes is him, you know, dying. However, given the circumstances that we've laid out, I honestly believe that he would survive the eclipse. For one, his ratio technique is kind of a godsend. To keep the explanation simple, because honestly, some of the Jujutsu Kaisen techniques can be a little complicated to explain, Nanami can basically create weak spots on any part of his enemy's body and exploit them, regardless of how well an enemy might be guarding against him. This is incredibly useful for when you need to take out enemies quickly and even works on overwhelmingly large opponents like Dagon's Fish Shikigami. So I think it's safe to say that Nanami really wouldn't have that much of an issue taking out a large number of apostles. Additionally, Nanami's endurance is next level, having the ability to evade at split-second times. And even if he wasn't able to evade, he probably would be able to save himself from being eaten just like he did with, again, Dagon's Fish Shikigami. And that's not even saying anything about his next level pain tolerance. This dude straight up got half of his body burned to beef jerky and was still able to fight multiple enemies at once. And of course, even in a hopeless situation, Nanami still remains cold, focused, and logical. Considering all the different cursed spirits he has to put up with on a daily basis, I can't imagine the apostles would even begin to break his composure. That said, while I do think that Nanami would survive the eclipse, I don't think he would make it out mostly unscathed. I think if anything, Nanami would barely survive and would probably lose a few limbs in the process. However, let's circle back around to characters I think would die, and to possibly an even more controversial pick, I think Tanjiro Kamado from Demon Slayer is unfortunately joining the rest of his family. Okay, maybe that one was a bit too far. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Now, I will say on paper, I can understand any argument that Tanjiro would survive. He has good endurance and mental fortitude, showcased when upon seeing his slaughtered family, he immediately picked up Nezuko and searched for a doctor in the freezing cold. Additionally, he's also very smart and tactical when it comes to fighting opponents, and is shown to be able to take a lot of pain, as witnessed in his fight with Gyutaro. And I think think this goes without saying, he's an incredibly skilled sword fighter with access to a very powerful breathing technique in the Hinokami Kagura. With all that said, the reason why I don't think Tanjiro would survive the eclipse specifically is because I feel like Tanjiro is more specialized to fighting enemies one at a time, or at most a few at a time. And if faced with a horde of gargantuan apostles would probably get overwhelmed. A lot of Tanjiro's biggest combat encounters are more about teamwork as opposed to his own raw strength, and often I feel as though he needs to rely on others when fighting demons. And with Guts preoccupied with Griffith, the only people Tanjiro can really rely on here are the Band of the Hawk, which let's just say aren't exactly the most effective when dealing with apostles. There's also the factor of the quote-unquote opening thread that Tanjiro can smell on his opponents to indicate their openings, a technique that I feel would be much more difficult to pull off in a place like the interstice, where the overwhelming scent of blood and carnage would almost certainly be impacting Tanjiro's sense of smell. I'm still not 100% on this one and would be willing to hear arguments in the comments, but based on my gut feeling, I do think that Tanjiro, while probably lasting a long time, would inevitably fall before the eclipse came to a close. And with that, we come to our final character, whom I do believe would survive the eclipse. And I hear you all asking, who is this mystery Giga Chad character who not only would survive the eclipse, but would survive completely unscathed with no injuries? And that character is Usopp from One Piece. So I think nowadays, Usopp does have pretty decent combat abilities. However, I think the one thing that will lead Usopp to victory in this scenario is his status as a professional coward. If this guy is afraid of something, he can run for miles and never look back. You cannot underestimate this dude's flight response. If he is in a situation where he knows he's going to die, there is no limit to the space he can put between himself and his enemies. Heck, honestly, I wouldn't even put it past Usopp to pretend to be dead amongst the rancid corpses of the Band of the Hawk. And of course, you know, the second he makes it out, he'll tell everyone in Midland about the brave escapades of the hero Usopp, the one who survived a skirmish with the God Hand and its demonic apostles. And thus, Usopp, the true hero of Midland, was born. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you or do you not agree with my picks, and who are some characters you think would or wouldn't survive the eclipse? This video was a bit different than what I usually do, but I just wanted to have fun with it. In no way are any of my opinions definitive. I'm basically just goofing around here. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel out tremendously, and if you're also in the mood for some more content, check out some of our other videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you all later. Take care.